My name is Sheldon Alexander, and thanks for joining me on this pod. We're going to take a deeper dive into this NBA Finals matchup between the Pacers and the Thunder, as well as the Raptors and Giannis rumors, a new All-Star game format. So much to talk about in the NBA. I mean, Tom Thibodeau's out already, which the Knicks fans are up in arms and going crazy about that. We'll get to all of that in a bit. But first, we got to talk about this NBA Finals matchup. I love doing a deep dive on the NBA Finals because everybody's right. Nothing's happened yet. Do you know what I mean? We all get a chance to give our opinions on what's been going on so far, what we've watched, who we like, all these things. You know, we got a couple days to get more hyped up on the matchup. And I already mentioned, right? Series pick. I got OKC in 6 games. That's what I like. You know, that's what we've seen so far. But when we deep dive, further into this matchup, I've said this before, I'll say this again. Thunder versus Pacers. If you care about NBA ratings, you're a loser. Why do you care about NBA ratings? It doesn't affect you at all, right? It really doesn't affect you at all. I work in the industry, okay? And I know that NBA ratings, like the ratings game, it matters to some, but it shouldn't matter to the average fan, okay? It's all just media narrative building and all that trash. But small markets, unless it's about your market of your team or the player that you cheer for the most plays on said team, how does it matter what teams are in the NBA Finals, where these teams are from, that it's from Indiana and Oklahoma City? How does that matter? It doesn't. Because this NBA Finals matchup is going to be so much fun. Up and down basketball, fast-paced, high energy. You're getting to see some of the newer stars in the league in terms of Shea, Gilgeous-Alexander, and of course, Tyrese Halliburton. The small markets don't matter. And so the hype machine shouldn't be any different if these two teams were wearing jerseys that said LA Lakers, New York Knicks. Yes, the hype machine would be a lot more, but why does that impact you sitting on your couch watching the game or not? Said this before, I'll say it again. Just admit you really don't like basketball. And that's cool. That's okay. But we can move on. Because if you're arguing about ratings and small markets and all that, you just really don't like basketball. And that's fine, right? We understand that the diehards are going to be in on stuff and then everyone else is going to catch up anyways, because that's just the way that the world works. But this whole narrative about small markets and ratings, miss me with all that. Because this is going to be super fun. Run and gun, up and down series. The difference to me is that OKC plays defense at a higher level and more consistently than Indy does. This will be super fun, though. It should be super fun. OKC heavily favored, as mentioned, but I'm going to go OKC in 6 because I do think that just the pace of play that the Pacers play, it'll be tough to adjust to. There'll just be one game where they just go crazy, hit threes. You can't stop them on offense. And it's, maybe OKC's missing their shots that game. There'll be one of those games. You might get another game where Halliburton is just going crazy. And that might be it too. Bottom line is, what I'm trying to say is, I just think Indy gets 2 games in this series, but overall, the matchups all favor OKC. They're just a better and at times a younger version than Indy, right? What I mean by that is, obviously Indy, an older team with Pascal Siakam, Miles Turner's a vet. Obi Toppin's been in the league for a while. You got older guys on the Indiana Pacers, whereas OKC, Shea's oldest or older on the team, because I guess Caruso, probably the oldest guy on their team, but their key pieces, Chet, J. Will, J. Dub, obviously Isaiah Joe, you got Cason Wallace, Lou Dort. These guys are young guys in the league. This is one of the youngest teams to ever have this good of a record this far in the season, much less make it to the NBA Finals. So that's what I mean by just a better and at times younger version than Indiana, right? Let's keep it going, though. Indiana's best player, Tyrese Halliburton. Great point guard, your point guard's point guard, a classic point guard who likes to pass the ball, set up his teammates, get everyone going. Everyone likes that, and that's pretty dope, right? The problem is OKC's point guard is the MVP of the league, of this game. The best basketball players in the world, to quote my man, Allen Iverson. I'll never get tired of that practice speech, by the way. The bottom line is Halliburton is really good. Shea's just a lot better, right? And so who's going to be able to play at their best in this series? Who is set up more to succeed? I think Shea, if he's shown us anything so far, is that he's getting his points off in any weather, in any building, and any time against any defender. He's going to find a way to get to the line. Miss me with all the foul hunting and all that stupid narrative, because, like, again, you just don't like basketball because he's not foul hunting. It's the playoffs. And what happens in the playoffs is there's times where your team needs a basket and your best player has to find a way to put points on the board. That's what top tier players do in the NBA. That's the difference between good and great. That's the difference between great and generational talent and MVP. That's the difference. Can you get a bucket whenever you want? And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander does that. It's going to be in the midi game or it's going to be at the free throw line. Either way, you cannot stop him from getting the buckets. Led the league in scoring this year and has led his team to the NBA Finals. More of that, I feel like, is going to continue. Tyrese Halliburton. His strength is he likes to get up and down. He likes to push the pace. He likes to run off makes and misses and get his team involved. Cool. But now we're going to stick Lou Dort on you and enjoy that battle for a 7-game series, right? And if it's not Lou Dort, maybe we'll bring Cason Wallace off the bench and have him guard you full court. Oh, and also Shai plays defense, which is not really something you'll say about Halliburton. Not that he's brutal on defense, but you'll give the matchup if Shai wants to take that matchup, which why would he? Because you got defenders on deck, like in the tuck, just waiting. I mean, you got Caruso even just waiting to come off the bench, right? So that matchup got to favor OKC. We keep it moving. You got Siakam, who just fresh off his Eastern Conference Finals MVP. Well, you know, how's he going to fare against this front line that was revamped from an OKC team in the past where it's like, I don't know, they might struggle anytime they run into a team that has good post players. Chet might not be big enough to handle that. Okay, cool. Now we got Hartenstein. And the way that Siakam and Miles Turner play, right? Miles Turner wants to be on the perimeter. He wants to shoot threes. Siakam wants to get out and run. Siakam wants to get downhill, get in the paint. Well, OKC's bigs are perfectly matched up for that. The other Jalen Williams off the bench will be another valuable guy in this situation. I bet you'll see some Caruso on Pascal Siakam as well. And that's going to be super interesting because, again, they have so many different bodies OKC has that they can throw at Pascal Siakam to make life difficult. And Miles Turner, right? He's able to win, especially in that last series where they're hunting Cat or they're hunting Jalen Brunson. But bottom line is the Knicks were tired in terms of getting out to the perimeter after the penetration from Halliburton. So Halliburton's driving in the lane and he's able to kick to wide open guys. The Knicks help and recover is like not even on the same planet as what OKC is able to do in those same situations. OKC prides their defense on being able to help in the lane, stop your dribble penetration, and then recover to contest a three-point shot. That's why OKC is one of the best defenses in the league, because they're able to do that at a high level and up and down their entire lineup. So that's going to be interesting as well, right? One of the other Pacers' strengths is that they have Nesmith, who was a little banged up towards the end of that Knicks series, but they have Nesmith and Nembhard who are there to wreak havoc on the defensive end. They guard your guards full court all the way, and they're even able to chip in on offense at certain points too, right? Nembhard might have his moments here and there. Nesmith, we know about the crazy, him going buck wild in the game 1 against the Knicks, where he hit a bunch of threes in a row. And so you think, okay, that's a pretty good advantage Indy should have, right? Wrong. You look at OKC, they're even better. You got Lou Dort, all defense, first team in the NBA this year. Montreal stand up. As mentioned, they got Caruso coming off the bench. as well. Like they just have better, like everything that you list that Indiana can do, OKC can either match or they're better. And that's just a tough matchup, right? The Pacers want to run. The Thunder are built to stop that. Thunder want to force turnovers. Both teams don't turn over the ball, right? They're both at the top of the league in terms of how many times they turn over the ball per game. The problem is that OKC forces a lot more. And there's a difference if you're Indiana going from hunting Cat and Brunson to OKC's defense, right? The Pacers against, just use game 6 as an example, game 6 against the Knicks. The Pacers got out and run, right? They were running all over the place, 25-10 fast break points. And then they had 34-13 advantage of points off turnovers in game 6 versus the Knicks. And that pretty much summed up the series. Leading fast break points, leading points off turnovers. But that's exactly what OKC does perfectly as well. And that's very tough. That's an interesting thing to me, right? When you break that down, because the Pacers are going to want to run off makes and misses. And it's super interesting, as I know a lot of people that follow me on whatever pod, we talk about the Raps a lot, obviously. And, you know, it's interesting watching as a Raps fan and seeing Pascal Siakam get busy again, because they've unlocked something with him where he's tapping back into what I would deem his most successful time with the Raptors when Kawhi was around and he was able to get busy off hustle plays, off running the floor, beating his opposing big down the floor, getting easy layups, getting points in transition, getting downhill, getting off the glass. Those are all things that Pascal Siakam, when he's doing that, to me, he's at his best. For me, when Pascal gets himself in trouble, and I know we get a lot of this talk about max players and who's the number 1 and who's the 1A, and obviously he just won Eastern Conference Finals MVP. To me, that talk with Pascal getting himself in trouble is more so when we get into the ISO ball, right? To when he has the ball and he's trying to dribble and the spin moves and all that in the half court. When he's running the floor, when he's getting on the glass, that's when he's at his best. When he's using his motor game, that's where he's going. Raptors fans will remember Pascal at his best with the Raps, getting out and running. Lowry to Pascal on the fast break was easy money. And now we're seeing Halliburton to Pascal, easy money. And shouts to Carlisle to being able to unlock that part and have Pascal understand, hey, you can get an easy 6 to 8 points per game just by running the floor, right? But that's how the Pacers want to play. That's how the Pacers are built to play. They outscored the Knicks by 74 points in transition, including 31 points in game 6. That means you're running off makes and misses. Again, outscoring a team by 74 points in a whole series and then 31 points in one game alone. That's insane. But will they be able to translate that success into success against OKC? That's going to be the most interesting part of this whole thing. That, to be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. I genuinely don't. Can they play the same style against OKC's defense? I don't think so. The Thunder are at their best when the pace gets pushed because no other team plays better defense or as deep, meaning they have as many dudes that are willing to play defense that hard more than OKC. You can get into their 8th, 9th, 10th guy, and that person's coming off the bench and playing defense. Yes, Shea will have a tough time getting his. J-Dub and Chet will also have to score, but the Pacers will have to play defense, which isn't really their strong suit. So it might be easier for J-Dub to get his points and be that second scorer that Shea needs. It might be easier for Chet to go off if Siakam is tiring himself out running up and down the floor, because again, Indy's defense is a little shaky, but they want to run off makes and misses, and they have to because that's how they're going to try to score and win this series. When they get into the half court, they're not as successful either, right? So it's going to be interesting to me to see how the Pacers will have to play defense against OKC and how that's going to work. They have to get points, but they will also give up points. The Pacers are going to try to play some zone, but OKC has zone busters. Kaysen Wallace comes off the bench. He splashes threes. Isaiah Joe comes off the bench. He splashes threes. Lou Dort can hit a three. Caruso can hit a three. Chetna can hit a three. Like, they have so many guys that can play in so many different ways, whereas Indiana's road to success is just going to be pace. And normally you can break down a team, right? Like, that was the reason we talked about it on the last pod. That was the reason for how bad that last series was for the New York Knicks, because the Knicks were unable to keep up at that pace with Indiana when they turned it on, when they wanted to go. It just wasn't going to be a thing, right? It just wasn't going to be a thing where Indiana was going to be able to, not outrun the Knicks. It just wasn't possible, right? So now let's look at it this way. What can be the difference? To me, how can the Pacers look at this and say, all right, we're going to try to get it in this, and we're going to try to run, and we're going to try to make this a series that benefits us, that gives us an opportunity to win. And to me, that starts with Pascal Siakam. Pascal Siakam, yes, just won the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, right? And that's cool, right? Everyone thinks that's awesome. That'll be great for him. But to me, if this is going to go another level, he's got to take his game to another level. He's got to be going 30 pieces every night. He has to be a consistent scorer for this team, and he might have to lead the way, because they might have Halliburton like wrapped up. If you're trying to throw, because there was even talk, people saying, oh, do you start Cason Wallace and start small, right? Because you can play smaller against the Pacers, right? You might not need to play your two bigs, but you might need the extra perimeter guy to throw at Tyrese Halliburton, or to match up with the backcourt of Halliburton and Nembhard. And that's a super interesting thought. But to me, I would just keep having multiple guys coming off the bench that have the ability to guard Halliburton full court. So whether that's Cason Wallace, whether that's Isaiah Joe, whether that's Lou Dort, whether that's Caruso, like, you just have so many guys that are going to come off the bench and make Tyrese Halliburton's life a living hell for this entire series. The Knicks didn't have as much players that were able to do it. But if you notice, the Knicks' success came when they finally opened up and started playing their bench. The problem with that was that included Landry Shamet and DeLon Wright, and you would hope to have better players than that. But guess what? OKC does. So to me, this really falls on Pascal Siakam. He will need to get busy every single night. He has to be their A scorer every single night. And can he do that? We'll find out. The problem is you're going up against the Oklahoma City Thunder, a Thunder team that so far is 80-18 this season overall. I'm going to say that again. 80-18 this season overall, including the playoffs. And they went 29-1 versus the East. 29-1 versus the East. Here's a stat for you. The top 5 teams, here's the reason why. The top 5 teams by turnover differential in NBA playoff history, okay? The 2013 Miami Heat were a plus 66. The 1997 Chicago Bulls were plus 72. The 1996 Chicago Bulls were plus 72. The 2019 Toronto Raptors were plus 79. And your 2025 Oklahoma City Thunder are plus 100 turnover differential so far this season, or in the playoffs. Think about that for a second. That is an insane number. Oh, the other thing that I didn't mention about those other teams, they all won the championship. Yeah. OKC in 6. That's what I'm going to say there. Now, we keep things moving though, right? Because as mentioned, there's lots of stuff going on in the NBA land, and Raptors fans are getting excited. Maybe other fan bases and Knicks fans might be getting excited too, because there's rumors of Giannis potentially wanting out, Giannis thinking about his options. We're getting all these headlines of Giannis and the Raptors have mutual interest. All these different things are floating out. What I like to do, though, is I like to go from where the source is coming from, right? Where are these stories starting from? That to me is the most important thing. We're talking about all this, especially in this era where I like to still big up journalism and reporters who are out here doing the work, and they have sources, and they're the ones digging to find the information that we so crave. So I want to give credit here to Brian Windhorst, because I want to read some of what Brian Windhorst said on his The Hoop Collective podcast. Because what ends up happening now is that we live in this world where you see memes, you see all these graphics pop up on social media, and there's no context given. And by rule, for me, I only pay attention to those things if I see who said it. So once I saw that this came from Brian Windhorst, I went and I watched the Windhorst podcast, The Hoop Collective. I watched it on YouTube that he does with Tim Bontemps and Tim McMahon. And you know what? I found it very interesting. I'm going to read you some of these quotes, because the quote that's getting all the headlines, again, the team, the Raptors, have begun to, quote, make noise within the league about looking for a big fish. That, my friends, is very interesting. That, my friends, is super interesting to me, because what that means when I really think about this, right? When I take a step back and think about this, you know what? No. Let me go through and give you the quotes first. He says, I don't want to get too far afield from this, but since this has come up, the Raptors are a team that is starting to make noise within the league about looking for a big fish. If you're an Eastern Conference team that's in the middle of the pack, you're looking at teams in front of you and going, some of them may not be able to come together, may be able to stay together. Quote, Boston is hurt, and so there are some teams that sniff the ability to make a move, and I think Toronto is one of those teams. He continues, and so naturally, any team that wants to make a move this summer, especially a team in the Eastern Conference, you're going to have Giannis on the board. But Toronto, I think, is going to try. From their initial conversations, teams in the league are getting the impression that Toronto is going to try to do something. I had an executive tell me yesterday that he thinks this could be an explosive summer. You know, just as Shams said the other day. But like this, you know, this is the whole league. People are saying that the amount of activity and calls happening in the league right now is at a much higher volume than it has been in years past. I know it does not mean it's going to happen, but Toronto is one of the teams that is sitting there on the balls of their feet, which is interesting. Close quote. Those are a bunch of different clips from Brian Windhorst's pod. As mentioned, I know we like seeing the headlines. I know we like seeing the one-word thing. I like to dig a little deeper because I want the context. I trust who the sources are in terms of people that are just throwing things out there for the clicks versus people who are throwing out actual information. Another person, Doug Smith, beat writer, OG beat writer for the Toronto Raptors, says he's unsure if it will happen, but there is mutual interest. He believes the Raps are, quote, uniquely placed to make an attractive offer that won't hurt their roster. Says the odds for Giannis are long, but the pieces of paying a steep price isn't too bad. He says, no, Doug Smith continues to say, no one on the Raptors is untouchable in trade talks for Giannis. I think they will probably talk about Scotty Barnes as a centerpiece. I don't think there's anybody on the roster they wouldn't talk to. Well, Raptors fans, here we are. Here we are. This, to me, my friends, super interesting. Because we're talking about Giannis Antetokounmpo. You're talking about Scotty Barnes, face of the franchise, to quote your man's Darko Rajakovic. And we'll start here. If the question is, would you give up Scotty Barnes for Giannis Antetokounmpo? My answer is, hell yes. That's not even a question, right? It's not a question to me. Y'all came at me a couple years ago when the whole Scotty was untouchable. Remember in the Kevin Durant talks? What was that now? 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And it was reported that Scottie Barnes was untouchable in Kevin Durant trade talks. And I said, that's kind of crazy. Like, how does that make any sense? Like, why would anybody on the Raptors team be untouchable for Kevin Durant in trade talks, especially Scottie Barnes? And here we are 2 years later, right? Here we are 2 years later. And everyone loves Fred and Pascal and OG and have been seeing what they're doing in the playoffs. And everyone's wondering, man, what could it have been if those guys all stayed together in Toronto? What could have happened? Well, wait, what if some of them stayed in Toronto and you also had Kevin Durant? Just 2 years later, this whole thing is just hilarious to me. So it's funny that we're doing it all over again and again in a different scenario. Yes, this is even different, more different, because Kevin Durant is older than Giannis was 2 years ago when this was going on. Okay, cool. But that means even more of a reason why you should give up Scottie Barnes. But also, Scottie Barnes is now 2 years older. So you have 2 more years of information on Scottie Barnes. And I'm simply going to ask this question to you, the Raptors fans. Has Scottie Barnes improved enough for you over the last 2 years? Serious question. Because personally, I'm not sure if I can definitively say that Scottie Barnes has improved a lot from last season to this past season that we just watched. To me, I don't know that I can say that Scottie Barnes definitely improved a lot from last season to this season. If you look at the numbers, pretty much the same. Some are a little bit lower. Yes, I know there was a tank culture that infected the Raptors last year, but they left Scottie out there to chase all defense. So he was out there playing, meaning he could take whatever shot he wanted, make whatever play he wanted, and yet his numbers were basically the same. I don't really understand that. I'll say this, and I've always said this about Scottie. Scottie Barnes, when you look at, his pedigree, his upbringing, right? He went to one of those big time schools that, you played with other star players, like you played with Cade Cunningham. You know what I mean? So I think that also continued to where he went to college and then he came off the bench. He wasn't with the starters. To me, when you add that into what we've seen with Scottie, and to me, when Scottie was at his best, Scottie will look better when he's surrounded by better players. And I know you say, duh, that's obvious. Isn't that most players? No, what I mean is when you're talking about big dogs, when you're talking about who's leading your team, when you're talking about who's the man, who's your franchise guy, who's your max player, who can be the best player on a really good team, that guy can cook in any weather. That's what I just said about Shea, right? Like you're going to get busy on any team, no matter who's around you, you're going to get yours. And I don't know if Scottie Barnes is that guy. I'm still not sure if he's going to be that guy or if he can be your best player on a winning team. I've yet to see enough evidence about that to this point, right? In his defense, yes, the team around him hasn't been that good lately, but that shouldn't stop you from getting your numbers. And I don't know if I've seen the numbers that have proven that he is that guy yet. On the flip side, Giannis is who you hope Scottie Barnes can be. NBA champ, finals MVP, multiple time MVP in the league. Again, the best basketball players in the world. Giannis is already Giannis. Still top 3 player in the league. Still top 3 in MVP voting. Still in his prime. He is that dude that you hope Scottie Barnes might be. So to me, the math is simple. No one should be untouchable in a Giannis trade talks. And not Scottie, not Grady, nobody. Anybody that they would want to take and whatever picks to get Giannis, if you're the Raptors, you do it. Of course you do. You're talking about one of the best basketball players in the game, still in his prime and under contract. And we already know the background and the ties to Masai, and Masai helping his family and get the visas and emigrate to North America so he could join the NBA. We know all those stories. We've seen the videos. We know Masai wanted to draft Giannis that year. We know all that. We get all that. We've heard all the rumors for all these years. But now would be the time for a lot of different reasons. And I said this when the Brandon Ingram trade happened last year, that, it was very low risk. I remember my mind stayed on it. I'll give a shout to my guy, Timmy McAuliffe, my OG, my dog. When I was leaving work that night, when the rumors were going high that this Brandon Ingram thing's happening, I was kind of like, why would they do that? Timmy was the first one that said, well, is it that bad of a deal? Like, it's nothing wrong with this deal at all. And you take a step back and you realize you're not giving up that much. The risk is in the contract and re-signing him, but you're able to do that. You hope that him having some time away to kind of think and regroup and refresh and a new start, you're banking on all that. But those are also the kind of moves that you have to make as a Toronto Raptors, right? Kind of like Indy taking a chance on Pascal. You know what I mean? It's not going to be the home run all the time where, I was going to say Kawhi, but even Kawhi was injured at the time. You have to take some risks when you're the Toronto Raptors. But also, you didn't really give up that much. But to me, what it really signified you getting Brandon Ingram was Masai Ujiri and company realizing that they needed to make a major upgrade talent-wise on the top end of their roster. To me, and I don't know this is just me connecting dots, me reading the tea leaves, me, all of a sudden you're talking about tanking and you're talking about trying to get a high pick in the draft and then you make a trade to get Brandon Ingram in. To me, it's also a sign that maybe some of your kids that you're banking on aren't necessarily where you want them to be yet. And you kind of need to speed up this process, right? Scotty, as mentioned, I don't think he improved as much last year from the year before. If you go back, to the years prior, I don't think that improvement was there. And also notice he went from being an all-star to not being an all-star anymore, right? So like I'm saying what I believe to be facts. You look at the numbers, it's hard to tell me that he improved. Grady, you've had 2 years of Grady and he hasn't been able to get through a full season yet, right? Barely gotten through, when you add up the 2 years, barely gotten through 3/4 of a season. In fact, those are your building blocks going forward. You hope to hit on Jacoby Walter. You hope that maybe Ochai can flip you and turn into something, right? Obviously, you re-sign quick. RJ Barrett is someone I haven't mentioned yet, but we know his contract is going to be very interesting and however this all plays out. But bottom line is, bringing in Brandon Ingram was about speeding up this process, getting back into the mix of things. So then now how does Giannis play into that, right? Basically, you're accumulating assets. Got a bunch of assets. What do you do with said assets? Can you push your chips in the middle and turn your assets into Giannis? Because there's a whole other interesting side point to this as well, where Masai's contract, reports indicate, is up next year. So you're going into the final year of your contract. At the same time, there's an acquisition being had where Rogers is now taking over MLSE. For those who might not be familiar, MLSE, Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, parent company of the Leafs, Raptors, Argos, TFC, etc., used to be owned by Bell, Rogers, and Larry Tannenbaum. Basically split into three, right? Rogers has now bought Bell's share. They also have put in a new president to oversee Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment. And if you notice what's happened so far with the other big teams at MLSE, Brendan Shanahan, who was president of the Leafs, no longer there. The president of TFC, no longer there. So if you look over at Masai Ujiri, some might say the writing might be on the wall that this might be go time for you. What does this mean for Masai? Well, I would say that if you're able to pull off a Giannis trade to the Raptors, that might earn you a contract offer, or at least that would be a good step in getting a contract offer. No, I think so. But then again, if we dig a little deeper into this, right, there was some debate post-championship on who thought Masai deserved a new contract and what that contract should be. If you go back and read those stories, again, journalism, great reporting being done, outlining the different opinions between Bell, between Rogers, and Larry Tannenbaum at the time, right? Again, the three entities that owned MLSE at the time. Post-Raptors championship, who wanted to sign Masai and who didn't want to sign Masai. And I'm just going to read this reports because I feel like having quotes with reputable sources matter. So the Toronto Star reported that Edward Rogers actively worked against plans to re-sign Masai Ujiri as vice chairman and president of basketball operations for the Toronto Raptors. Rogers reportedly felt Ujiri wasn't worth the amount offered in the contract extension. CBC reported that Rogers' attempts to sabotage Ujiri's re-signing were ultimately unsuccessful, and Ujiri remained with the Raptors. So all of this is going on all at the same time. Super interesting time for the Toronto Raptors. And I guess if we wrap it all up with, if the question is, should the Raptors, because this is super interesting times in Toronto sports. Of course, everyone's going to be talking about the Leafs and Mitch Marner and what's going to happen there. And yes, that deserves all the headlines too. Again, I'm a shook Leafs fan right now. Totally. But in terms of the Raptors, also very interesting times. If the question is, should you do whatever it takes to get Giannis? My answer is yes. And then you figure out the roster afterwards. You do not pass up an opportunity to get Giannis Antetokounmpo in a Raptors uniform. But hey, people, you let me know what you think in the comments. Would you trade Scotty Barnes for Giannis Antetokounmpo? Would you put him in the package? Would he be a part of the deal? I've seen some things floating around that it could be like, Scotty, RJ, I think Ochai, 3 picks could get you Giannis and Kuzma, I think it is. Or like that's the starting point. That's like the framework, right? I don't know. Everything's interesting. But you can't really tell me that a team, if you're starting with Giannis, Brandon Ingram, Emmanuel Quickly, and then I'll figure out the rest of my roster, that gets you at least 6th in the East, no? I mean, Giannis on his own gets you 8th in the East. So, right, I would figure Giannis on his own gets you that. But I mean, if you're figuring out a way to get Kuzma along too, I don't know. Like, listen, I'm just saying it's interesting. Either way, let me know what you think, people. Let me know what you think. And we'll wrap this one up with news today from Adam Silver, who announced that next year's NBA All-Star game in Los Angeles will be Team USA versus the world. The interesting thing, though, is that this will be played on a Sunday afternoon, sandwiched in between Olympics coverage on NBC. Now, there's a lot there to unpack, right? A lot there to unpack. One, again, the NBA's rights are switching over from TNT to NBC, right? NBC is back. And yes, a lot about the Inside the NBA crew, which is, super interesting. And there'll be lots more time to talk about the Inside the NBA crew because they're not going anywhere. And we're all happy about that. But with NBC back in the mix, the All-Star game strategically happens to be during the Winter Olympics, when everyone will already be waving their flag and everyone cheering on their countries and all of the above, right? So the NBA, I think this is a smart move by the partners of NBC to triple down on this. You could now add into your Olympic promos, right? Hey, it's the Olympics. And guess what? We also have our NBA All-Star game featuring USA versus the world. Now, to me, this is great on multiple fronts because you are now also putting the pressure on the players because they know the Olympics are on. They're going to be into the Olympics. They're going to be feeling patriotic because everyone feels patriotic during the Olympics, even non-sports people. So if you're someone who is in a professional sport, and most of these guys have already represented for their country, and then now in a game that you normally haven't cared about for the last decade or however long it's been, but now I'm going to put you in between the Olympics, where people have worked their whole lives for, like, some people for these races that last a minute. And now if you don't do your part and you come out and mail it in the middle of Olympic coverage, you might be labeled the biggest losers in all of sports. Like, it shouldn't be this hard to beg people to try to play basketball, a game that you get paid millions of dollars. Because that's all this whole all-star game narrative comes down to, right? I just like that Adam Silver and the NBA keeps trying different things, because the alternative is just to do nothing. And every year try to convince them like, hey, we need you guys to play. We need you guys to play. At least I give Adam Silver and the NBA credit for doing their part, and the rest is up to the players. So if you're on Team USA and hey, you put on a USA on your chest and you want to go out and half-ass it in the middle of the Olympics when literally the whole world will be watching, because the promo machine for that NBA All-Star game during the Olympics, and they're putting it in the afternoon on purpose, again, to sandwich it in between big-time events, and NBC holds that much weight, they will be putting big-time events on either side of that NBA All-Star game, right? So you have it set up that way. And if you're an NBA player putting on that USA jersey after what we just saw in the Olympics last year, where Steph, LeBron, KD, like that was the most hype, amped up atmosphere of watching basketball that we've seen in a super long time. So is it going to be that hype? Probably not. But you're hoping for a little bit of that magic, just a little bit. And of course, they're going to talk about, hey, look at what happened with the NHL and the Four Nations. And they haven't figured out the format yet of this All-Star game, exactly how it's going to work. But they're obviously trying to eat off of what happened with the NHL and the Four Nations. And you really can't, because it's a way different sport and a way different setup, because there's fighting in hockey. And, first off, hockey players and best on best just means something different. The Canada-US rivalry means something different. We already know the political tensions were even higher, so that meant something different. All of these things going on at the same time, right? So you're just trying to work off of some of that magic. The NBA players saw what happened with that All-Star game last year when the Four Nations Cup was going on during, I think, like the dunk contest, I think it was, and everyone was going crazy talking about the Four Nations as opposed to what was going on with the All-Star game. Bottom line is it just comes down to the pride of the players. That's it. Do you want to try or do you not want to try? And the interesting part is for Team World, because if you think about Team World, and I mean, when you break it down, you're going to have Shea. You assume you're going to have Luka, although who knows? As Luka might play, Luka might not. I don't know. But you assume you have Shea, you assume you have Luka, you assume you have Jokic, you assume you have Giannis. Shea's going to try because Shea plays hard in All-Star games. Giannis is going to try because Giannis plays hard in All-Star games. Jokic, he's going half speed all the time. So, I mean, he's going to do his thing. Luka never really tries. But at the end of the day, I think if one of these teams comes out and you're getting blown out by the other, pride is going to kick in. You're not just going to allow this beatdown to happen. Again, national TV in the middle of the Olympics with your country on your chest. So I applaud the move. Interested to see how it all turns out. I hope you guys were interested to see how this pod all turned out and you got all the information you needed, because this was a lot of fun. Appreciate breaking down everything with y'all. As always, thank you for tuning into the pod. Make sure you like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. And as I always say, the best way to keep up with the content is to follow me on socials at Sheldon Alexander on Instagram and YouTube, and at Shell Alexander on the app formerly known as Twitter. And as I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is been another great dope episode of the podcast. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.